Webinar is open.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We've just opened the webinar and people are rolling in. So we're going to give it another 60 seconds or so. Just let everyone get in and settled, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. So hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on the Canadian Guideline on Victim Advocacy and Support Services for Child and Youth Advocacy Centres in Canada. My name is Christina Schaefer, and I'm the project coordinator at the C-STAR Child and Youth Advocacy Centre program in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Pleased to be here today with co-presenters from across the country. We have Rebecca Highvine, sorry, Rebecca, I'm going to butcher your name. Highvine Kurskowski. Oh my goodness. Kursikowski. Sorry.
You were close, Christina.
So close. I did practice ahead of time. Rebecca is from the project supervisor from Child Witness Centre in Kingston, Ontario. We also have Krista Aronson, regional manager of Safe Kids and Youth Coordinated Response in Kootenay Boundary, BC. And Samantha Ward, program manager, Child and Youth Advocacy Centre, Simcoe Muskoka in Simcoe Muskoka, Ontario. So I'd like to start us off by acknowledging that I am joining today in Mi'kmaq, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We also acknowledge that we have participants joining from different regions across the country today, and our presenters will be acknowledging their own locations as they present. Before we begin today's session, just a few quick housekeeping points to go over. If you are joining in a group today, if you could please just enter how many people are joining with you in the chat, that would be helpful, as Boost keeps track of the stats of how many participants there are in these webinars. And if you're joining in a group, that doesn't necessarily get reflected in the participant numbers. So that's helpful if you can just enter that information in the chat. Today's webinar will be presented in English, but interpretation is also available in French. So to change the language that you are hearing, you can click the globe icon in your Zoom controls and switch channels. You can access a French version of the slides to follow along today by clicking on the file that will be shared in the chat. And just a quick note, administrators from Boost will be monitoring the chat, but if you have questions for the presenters, please put that in the separate function that's labeled Q&A. So those Q&A, anything entered in that Q&A will come directly to us as presenters. We'll have time for a question and answer at the end today. But if you have technical questions, any issues, please enter that in the chat and we'll monitor those two separate channels. Okay, I think that's it for our housekeeping today. So let's get started. All right, so a little bit about our structure for today. We are going to start off with a bit of background and context on the Advocacy and Support Services Guideline. Then we're going to look at a few different ways that the advocate role has been implemented across Canada, and we'll hear from our different presenters about some of the unique ways that that advocate role functions at their centers. We will reflect a bit at the end on some of our challenges and learnings. And finally, like I said, we'll have time for question and answer at the end. We are going to hold questions until the end, but please feel free to enter them at any point in the Q&A function. We'll hold those to the end and then have an opportunity for a moderated question and answer. So the guideline that we are talking about today says that victim advocacy and support services are available to all children, youth, and their families at the CAC-CYAC. Advocacy and support are offered to help reduce trauma for the child, youth, and supporting family members, and to improve outcomes. Now, there are a number of key components associated with the guideline, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of the main ones to keep in mind here is that a victim advocate is available to the child and family to provide a consistent and comprehensive network of support. And that can include a number of different functions and activities, including providing support, education, system navigation, information and updates, access to supportive services and referrals, and continuity and follow-up. Now, we know that a number of different partners working with us at a CYAC may provide elements of support to the family as part of their role. But what we're talking about today is really the specific function of the CYAC that is focused on providing that support and navigation to the family to help them navigate the response. And this is often achieved through the role of a victim advocate at a child and youth advocacy center. But just as we know, no two child and youth advocacy centers are the same, the way that this role is implemented is often not exactly the same at any two centers either. And so this role may be called a number of different things, such as victim advocate, child and youth advocate, family advocate, victim services responder, coordinator, or navigator, depending. So first up, let's look at why it's necessary to have this as a specific role. We know it's common sense that victims and families will benefit from having support as they navigate a difficult and new and complex experience. But why specifically is that important? Well, we know that child and youth victims and their families often have a number of individualized needs. They may need assistance in understanding and navigating through the responses of different systems. They may require both immediate and ongoing support throughout the criminal justice process and after. And so we know that all partners working with children and families are doing their best to carry out their work and to be mindful of the best interests of the child. We also recognize that we work in a complex network of different systems. And even when everything is working at its best, we know from the perspective of the family, navigating that system, those systems and services can still be challenging. And so there's value in having a function that's focused solely on providing that support and navigation. Continuity of support is also important. So there often isn't one designated role with a mandate to provide continuity of support across a number of different scenarios for these families. And so the ability to offer this continuity can be important for trust, communication, and consistency with the family. And having that support provided in a coordinated way at the CYAC really aligns with the overall goal of a CYAC to provide a coordinated response across systems. And finally, there is value in having a role designed with a bit of neutrality and a little bit of an arm's length relationship that's not necessarily aligned with any one specific partner mandate that the family may be working with. And this can be important because we know families come to us with a range of backgrounds and different experiences and expectations and fears. And the partners that they're working with also have their own mandates. They may be focused on the investigation pieces, on protection decisions, and this can all influence the dynamics, sometimes the power dynamics in those relationships, the dynamics of how the family interacts with those partners and how comfortable they feel. And so having advocacy and support services as a bit of a neutral role can sometimes be valuable in how families engage with that support. Now, when we think about how and where the advocate role fits within our MDT responses, one concept of this advocate role really puts it alongside the family and at the center of the wraparound response. And so we know there will be a number of these different providers involved with the family. And this concept of the advocate role kind of with the family in the center as a bit of a neutral response aligns it separately and with the family while still being a part of that overall wraparound response. It's interesting, I think, also that the role is sometimes described as the glue to the overall team response. And we see this metaphor pop up in a number of different places. So the study commissioned by Department of Justice Canada in 2018 on understanding the development and impact of child advocacy centers found that the role of the victim advocate was a significant strength of the CAC model. It was seen as providing the glue to hold the MDT together and supporting clients through the process. We also see this from the Field Guide to Family Advocacy from Children's Advocacy Centers of Mississippi and West Virginia Child Advocacy Network. that found or that stated you are the hub or the glue for the team's overall response. And I think this is interesting in how it highlights that the advocate's role in ensuring a cohesive and coordinated response. All right, so now let's talk a bit about outcomes. What do we hope that the support will achieve? The guideline mentions some outcomes here, that advocacy and support are offered to reduce trauma for the child, youth, and supporting family members, and to improve outcomes. But there may be a number of different ways that providing that support leads to these outcomes. And like we mentioned, I think it's reasonable to assume that providing families with support and assistance through a difficult and complex experience would be expected to lead to better outcomes. But also, given that it's a broad and a varied role, there may be different reasons that providing that support leads to those positive impacts. And I know a number of CYICs are working on theories of change and really kind of digging into these nuances a little bit more. And I think it's certainly an interesting area for future research. So what I have here is an outcomes logic model for multidisciplinary teams that was developed by Herbert and Bromfield in 2019. And it's a complex slide, but stick with me here. One of the pieces that I think is relevant to what we're talking about today is looking at how, along the bottom here, we get from that provision of immediate and ongoing support for the child and family to the top of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And you can see that there are a number of different and overlapping pathways that get us from that point A to point B. But some of the ways that this support is leading us toward those outcomes is by decreasing child and family distress, improving contact and engagement with the multidisciplinary team, and increasing referral and engagement to services and treatment. So we know there are many different aspects of this role that can have an impact on the family's experience and their outcomes. With all this in mind, we know that the support received at a child advocacy center is often highly valued by families. And so that 2018 study commissioned by Justice Canada that I mentioned found that caregivers identified the victim advocate as the most important service received by them and their children. So we know this is a highly visible and valued aspect of the child advocacy center response. Now, like we mentioned, the way that the support is actually structured in practice can differ across CYICs depending on a number of factors. Some of those considerations can include the existing services in a community and looking at how to structure this role in a way that avoids duplication, a community's own gaps and needs, their available resources, their case volume, and their geographic reach. And along those lines, the way that the role is structured can differ as well. So it may be offered as a designated role within the Child Advocacy Center. The support services may be provided by a partner agency, and the Child Advocacy Center is involved more in ensuring the family gets linked up and helping to coordinate, but the Child Advocacy Center is not involved in actually delivering those support services directly. Some components may be shared across roles, so it may be a combination of those two. Maybe one designated person who carries the caseload and holds the case from start to finish, or it may be multiple people who share and trade off across the course of a family's case. It may be a paid role at the CYIC, or some CYICs use volunteers in this role to support and complement the way that these services are delivered. And so this is reflected in the key component of the guidelines that states that although more than one person may perform advocacy functions at different points in time, coordination that promotes continuity and consistency is the responsibility of the CYIC. So with all that background in mind, we're going to look at a few examples of this in practice across the country. And I think it's important to keep in mind that although the role may be implemented in different ways, we're ultimately all working toward implementation of the same guideline, and the goals remain the same: to provide comprehensive advocacy and support to reduce trauma and improve outcomes. So with that, we're going to hear from a number of speakers today from CYICs with different structures and some unique aspects in how this role is delivered. And so first up, I am pleased to hand it over to Rebecca from Child Witness Center.
Thank you, Christina. As Christina said, I'm Rebecca Highbine-Krzyzikowski. I'm the program supervisor at the Child Witness Center, and we are located in Waterloo Region in Ontario. We are situated on the Halaman Track, which is the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada and Halamade treaties. So my role at the Child Witness Center is to provide direct supervision to our two client-centered programs, and those include the Child Witness Program, which offers direct court support to children and youth in our communities, and the Child and Youth Advocate Program, which is what I'm going to be speaking to today. So our Child and Youth Advocacy Center is a partnership between Family and Children Services of Waterloo Region, the Waterloo Region Police, and the Child Witness Center. The Child Witness Center, the organization that I work for, provides the backbone support to the CYAC initiative. And as the backbone support, it was the Child Witness Center that undertook the initial needs assessment for our community and worked in collaboration with our partnering agencies to develop what is now known as the Child and Youth Advocacy Center. We opened our doors in May of 2016, and our CYAC operates on a model of co-location, meaning child protection, police, and advocates are all located under one roof, allowing us to provide direct services to clients from the beginning of their interaction with police and child protection. Christina, can you change the slide? So just a few things about our Child and Youth Advocate program. So it is a voluntary program, and this is something we've tried to instill from the very beginning. So prior to attending the CYAC, police or child protection, whoever connects with the family first, will seek consent for our child and youth advocates to meet the family when they arrive at the center. And sometimes this is unable to happen. So alternatively, a child and youth advocate can meet the family when they arrive at the center, explain their services, and obtain consent at that point. Our child and youth advocates cannot provide support to children, youth, and their families without this informed consent. Next, primarily the child and youth advocate services are utilized within the scope of the CYAC, but services may extend to other areas of our local police. So when we first started, we did have a scope of practice for our CYAC, which is basically anything that's interviewed by our youth protection unit with Waterloo Region Police. Sometimes though, our advocates will provide support to traffic accident victims, to witnesses of intimate partner violence, to youth victims of pure sexual assault, which is investigated by a different branch in Waterloo Region, witnesses of a homicide, or anything really where police are interviewing children and youth. Another role of our advocates is to provide consistent support, advocacy, and referral services to children, youth, and their families. The advocates are available at our center from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Working on a shift, we have 3 advocates employed by our agency, and they're flexible within their hours as well. We do not provide any weekend support. And then the child and youth advocate primarily work out of our CYAC location, but they can attend forensic interviews at any police station or child protection location. They cannot attend interviews that happen within the community or in the school. Okay, so our advocates provide forensic interview support. So like I already said, they meet and greet the children, youth, and their family when they arrive at the CYAC. They provide a tour of the center. They explain the interview process and introduce the child and youth to the MDT. This is typically the police officer in charge, as well as the child protection worker. They complete our child and youth advocate consent, as well as a release of information, including in that the members of the MDT that are present that day. They are available to support the child, youth, and their family during the interviews, answering questions they might have about the process and supporting their emotional well-being during that time. And then, provided the family consents to it, they offer a follow-up phone call within 72 hours and then continue to connect with the family as needed. So sometimes a child and youth advocate is unavailable or unable to attend the initial forensic interviews. In this case, the police or child protection worker can make a referral to the advocate, and they will follow up with the family in 72 hours, completing consents and then connecting back with the MDT for any of the information they might need. And then our advocates provide ongoing support. So they can refer children, youth, and their families to other supportive services within our community. They maintain regular communication with the family on a scheduled basis as needed. So the schedule might be initially every week they're checking in with the family, and then they might move to every other week, every month. And sometimes they'll stay connected with the family right up till the court process starts. They provide general support and information about the process. They serve as an advocate to liaison between families and the other supportive agencies. And they maintain contact with the MDT for relevant updates, as well as sharing questions and concerns raised by the family. Our advocates do not provide any ongoing clinical support or treatment, and they do not sit with the children or youth while they're being interviewed. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about what our advocate role looks like at CSTAR in Halifax. So at our CYAC, this support role is delivered by child and youth advocates. We have 2 child and youth advocates who are based at the CYAC. When we developed this role, we structured it as a Bachelor of Social Work position, and we value the role having some experience in having worked in child protection or child welfare, and also having experience in intake and client navigation. And that's because when we developed the role, we kind of looked at the competencies and perspectives that we felt were important, and we felt that matched well to this profile. There's a value we feel in having a strong understanding of the other systems and sometimes how they operate. So for example, the context of child welfare decisions, that could be a really valuable perspective to be able to bring when you're helping a family to understand and navigate those decisions or what the impact of those decisions from the outside. We have been fortunate to have worked with 2 very experienced social workers in our advocate roles over the years. And this has been beneficial, of course, for a number of reasons, but I will highlight in particular, we found this valuable in the early years as we were introducing this as a new role in our jurisdiction and growing visibility and trust with our partners and feeling out exactly how the role would function. So we had an outline of what we anticipated the role would look like, and that was from our research with CYACs in the United States and some of the earlier Canadian centers. But of course, what we had down on paper in theory didn't always exactly map out to how things would work in our region in practice. And so it was really beneficial at that stage to have individuals in these roles that we knew had a solid understanding of the systems and were able to respectfully see where there were gaps and how and where this advocate role could add value versus when it would be a duplication. So I'm going to look a little bit at just the logistics of what our advocate role looks like. So this is a very simplified timeline of some of the steps that a child and family may interact with. Our advocate role becomes involved at the time of a family's visit to CSTAR. So they're often not involved before the family arrives for their forensic interview. The advocate is involved in primarily supporting the caregiver. So they will sit with the child, they'll interact with the child and ensure that the experience of the visit feels positive for the child. But in terms of providing direct support and navigation and assistance, that work is often done with the caregiver. And the aim is often to support and empower that caregiver so that the caregiver can support their child. If the family wishes, our advocate can be involved for ongoing follow-up for as long as the family would like. And that follow-up is available regardless of the case outcome. So if child protection closes their file, if the case doesn't proceed to charges, our advocate is still able to check in and follow up and ensure that the family has needed supports. If a case does proceed to charges, victim services in our jurisdiction provides the court prep and the court support and the information related to the criminal justice system. So our advocates may stay involved to complement that support. They may stay involved alongside victim services, but they're not duplicating those aspects of victim services role. So looking at the advocate's role at the time of a family's visit to CSTAR for the forensic interview and the medical exam if one is needed. During that visit, our advocate will help to plan a smooth and coordinated visit. They will meet with the caregiver while the child's being interviewed. And this support and this discussion often focuses primarily on process and system information. So I'm sure, like many other CYACs, our advocates aren't delving into case details. They're not soliciting a lot of information from the family. They're really focused on process and system navigation. At our CYAC, our advocate doesn't engage in in-depth trauma screening or detailed assessments, especially at this stage. This may be different at other CYACs. Our view has been that families often have a lot going on at this initial visit. And so we felt that this often isn't the best time to be diving into detailed assessments or the caregiver's trauma history in depth in terms of the advocate's ability to engage with and support the family in the experience of that visit. Same with providing support to the child after the interview. Our advocate's focus is really on the child's immediate needs, engaging in some enjoyable activities, playing cards or games or something like that with the child, really focused on keeping the environment positive and supportive. And then they can provide a bit of more in-depth assessment and assistance with referrals to the family through the follow-up process. But we really aim to just focus on how that experience feels during the day of the child's forensic interview and aim to keep that as positive and light as we can. If the interview doesn't happen at CSTAR, the case may be referred to our advocates to provide ongoing follow-up support by phone, but our advocates don't travel to outside interviews. So that's different than what may happen at some other centers. We have a series of psychoeducational workshops that have kind of developed from our advocate role. And so I mentioned them here as, I think, an interesting innovation that's come as we've seen the role evolve and grow. These workshops were developed really in response to some common questions that our advocates often got from caregivers, looking at how can I best support my child over the next while. If there is a significant wait list to access mental health services, we know that caregivers at that time often had a lot of questions of what they can be doing in the meantime. And so this psychoeducational workshop series focuses on helping caregivers to understand trauma, emotions, have some of their own self-awareness of their own reactions and how that can impact their child, provide some practical parenting strategies, and offer some information on self-care. So these complement the support that's often provided by our advocates and really bolsters that information that our advocates are often providing. It can also help to bridge a gap in time if the family is waiting for the child to get connected with mental health treatment, and then it can complement that treatment when it does become available. And finally, like I mentioned, our advocates provide ongoing follow-up. So this is an individualized level of contact with the families. We don't necessarily have a set schedule or a set time frame when our advocates have to follow up with families. So it very much is driven by the needs of the family. And some families appreciate regular check-ins. Others are more apt to just call when they have a question, but are otherwise happy to kind of be left alone. And so we really individualize what that contact looks like depending on the needs of the family. Our advocates, like I mentioned, may stay connected alongside victim services if they become involved. And our advocates will close the file when the family is ready. And for some families, that may be after 1 or 2 contacts. If they're feeling good, they're linked up with supports, they're feeling well supported, and they don't feel that they need ongoing contact, we can close the file at that point. The family is always welcome to call, and we can reopen the file at any time. For other families, they will stay connected with our advocates over the course of months, sometimes years, particularly for cases that do go through the criminal justice process. We know that can be a lengthy process. And so we have families that will stay engaged with our advocates, having regular check-ins over the full course of that process. And then finally, our advocates attend our case review meetings. And so this is an opportunity to share any questions or concerns or updates from the family with the partners. And it also provides our advocates with some of that situational awareness from the partners on what's happening on the case so that they are best able to help the family navigate and support. All right, here's my contact information here. Always happy to field questions if anyone has questions specific to CSTAR. I've also included our website here, which has some additional information on our advocate role and our workshops. And with that, I am happy to hand it over to Krista from Sky.
Thanks, Christina. So yes, I'm Krista Aronson, the manager of the Safe Kids and Youth Coordinated Response, or as we like to call ourselves, Sky. And we're located, as you can see here, in the southeastern part of BC. We are a rural model CYC, so as I'll explain, we exist a little differently than your typical brick and mortar CYC. But Sky serves children and youth under 19 and supports approximately 60 files a year. On the next slide, you'll see a map which highlights the area that Sky serves. We operate over the West Kootenay region, which is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Sinixt, the Syilx, and the Ktunaxa peoples. And as you can see, we have a large geographic region. It's about 30,000 square kilometers. And while we also have a small population base, we're about 80,000 spread out over that whole area. Sky is currently operating in 6 communities across our region. As you can see here on the map, we're in Salmo, Castlegar, Trail, Nakusp, Nelson, and Caslow. And oh, I'm still on the map. I like talking about our region. It's full of, as you can see, challenging mountain passes, difficult road conditions in the winter, and we have very few public transportation options. So that makes traveling through our region difficult. And as a result of all these challenges, when we conducted our feasibility study, which was back in 2012, it determined that what would best serve the needs of children and youth in our communities would be a rural model CYC. So we aim to provide the same collaborative services that a brick and mortar center would provide, but without a building. So in each of our communities that hold police and child protection services, we've established multidisciplinary teams or MDTs. We've signed off on collaboration agreements, and we have child-friendly interview rooms that are equipped with video recording equipment. Our child-friendly interview rooms are generally donated by one of our community partners and are utilized for other things outside of our use, but we have supplied the video recording equipment and other child-friendly furnishings. Okay, so on the next slide, it shows that when Sky began, and for about 10 years, our agency contracted with victim service workers in each community to fill the role of child advocate, and we refer to them as Sky coordinators. So as victim service contracts are allocated by population, many of our victim service workers are part-time. So this worked for us just to top up their hours. And they were able, with those additional hours that we funded, it gave them time specifically to coordinate the MDT pieces. And then they still provided the support to the clients through their victim service roles. And this was really effective for us because of their already established relationships with MDT members, their knowledge of the practices and the culture of their local community that they worked in. It allowed for better buy-in and faster protocol development with our partners. But the model also brought some challenges with it. For example, when we experience a victim service vacancy, we depend on the victim service contract holding agency to hire someone new. So in some of our really small communities, finding someone with suitable education and experience can lead to long delays in hiring. And every time we experience that vacancy in a victim service position, it translates into a gap in our Sky service provision. So recently during the pandemic, we had experienced a vacancy in one of our communities that lasted well over a year. And then, of course, another challenge that we noted was the nature of the victim service job, which made coordination challenging. For example, they respond to a client in crisis, or if there's a court day that's scheduled, MDT coordination understandably has to take a back seat, or perhaps the victim services would be unavailable for a meeting that they had organized. And we had noticed that these challenges had only really increased during the pandemic. So in the fall of 2021, we gathered stakeholders from across our region. We all got together for a two-part strategic planning process, and ultimately it led to us restructuring our coordination model. So we now have two part-time coordinator positions. They're separate from our victim service positions, and each position is currently supporting 3 communities. And we have employed those coordinators directly through Sky's umbrella agency. And so on the next slide, we see a bit of a breakdown of the roles that our coordinators handle, specifically when there's a file that comes up. In the yellow background area, you'll see what our Sky coordinators do, and then blue will show what our MDT members do. So you'll see that most of our referrals come from police or MCFD, which is our child protection agency. And when either agency receives a disclosure, they contact our Sky coordinator to arrange an interview. So our Sky coordinators are involved right from the very beginning. They assist with coordinating the interview, booking the space, making sure that victim services will be available to provide support to the family at the time of interview. And they can also contact the family, explain what Sky is, and provide them the consent forms in advance. Once that interview takes place, our MDT members are the primary folks that are providing ongoing support to our families as per their typical roles. And our Sky coordinators' primary focus shifts to supporting the MDT. So that might look like arranging case review meetings regularly so that the team can discuss the file, or assist with maintaining that solid communication between MDT members throughout the duration of the file. As we aren't a co-located facility, we need this clear division of tasks between our coordinators and our victim service workers, as well as ensuring that we weren't going to duplicate that victim service role. And so the primary task of the coordinator is to keep the team connected and in regular communication throughout the duration of that file. And as we have already discussed, these are the types of tasks that our coordinators are responsible for. So they're coordinating and scheduling the interviews. They're providing that initial system navigation and explanation to families in the early stages. They organize all the MDT meetings, and they make sure that the team is participating in regular case review. They manage our data collection, and they also provide community education about Sky in each of their communities, and they maintain the child-friendly spaces in each community. So in this way, we wholeheartedly agree with the quote that Christina had shared earlier, that the coordinators are the glue that hold the MDT together, especially in a model like ours where our team members are not co-located. We rely so heavily on solid relationships and good communication ultimately to ensure that we are meeting our goal and our aims. And it's really the coordinators that help keep our teams connected and communicating effectively. And so this is our Sky website. On there, we have a short video. We're very proud of it. So we encourage you to check it out. You'll find it there on our website. And also there's my contact information If you want to reach out to talk about Sky any further, I'm always happy about it. I'm always happy to chat more about Sky, so feel free to reach out directly. Thanks.
Thanks, Krista. So hello, everybody. I am Samantha Ward, and I am the program manager with the Child and Youth Advocacy Center in Simcoe, Muskoka. The Child and Youth Advocacy Center, Simcoe, Muskoka, acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. We would like to acknowledge the enduring presence of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of this region, specifically the Tri-Council First Nations, comprised of Beausoleil First Nation, the Chippewas of Rama, and the Chippewas of Georgina Island. We also acknowledge the Moose Deer Point First Nation, the Wata Mohawks, and the Georgian Bay and Moon River Métis Council in this region as well. It should be noted that the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee nations have also walked on this territory over time. So to begin, we here in Simcoe, Muskoka, we opened our doors in Orillia, Ontario in 2014, followed by the opening of our second location in the city of Barrie to better support families living in southern Simcoe County. Our CYAC operates using a mixed model of both brick and mortar physical locations and a rural model, as you heard just now from Krista. We refer to this as our community mobile approach to advocate program delivery. So we have our 2 physical locations in Orillia and Barrie, as well as 8 community mobile locations spread around the region of Simcoe, Muskoka. And I'll speak to that a bit more thoroughly in the coming slides. We actually break our multidisciplinary teams, or MDT, into 2 categories. We have investigative MDT partners, who are our police services and our child protection services, who initiate service access with us. And then we have our post-investigative referral MDT, who we coordinate care and service with for our children, youth, and families after a forensic interview. The CYAC Simcoe, Muskoka works with a very large group of investigative MDT. This is one of the really unique aspects to our program and our model. We actually partner with 6 different police services, which includes Ontario Provincial Police, Barrie Police Services, Anishinaabe Police Services, Rama Police Services, Canadian Forces Baseboard and Military Police, as well as South Simcoe Police Services. Collectively, these police teams compile over 17 individual police detachments that are spread across our nearly 9,000 square kilometer region. Also, we partner with our region's 2 child protection organizations, Simcoe Muskoka Family Connections and Nog Dwenmog Benojiog, which is our Indigenous child wellbeing agency. So this poses new challenges and ongoing consistent relationship building, similar to the Sky model, and how important those MDT relationships are. Our post-investigative multidisciplinary teams are made up of victim services, our New Path Youth and Family Services, who offer quick access mental health supports, the Regional Center for Suspected Child Abuse and Neglect through the Orillia Soldiers Memorial Hospital, as well as a wide variety of youth and family community service partners. So the role of the advocate in practice and the role of the advocate in general is central to the model of a CYAC, which you've heard about already today. For us, the advocate program in practice can be broken down into the following sectors that we'll go through: our advocate support, our community and mobile approach to advocacy programming, our facility dogs, common ground youth group, as well as our satellite medical examination space. Our advocates are with children, youth, and families every step of the way, from the time police or child protection services schedule a forensic interview throughout their healing journey until they feel that our supports are no longer needed for them. The advocacy program is voluntary and free of charge for children and youth up to and including age 24, and their non-offending family members. Advocates provide support to child and youth victims or witnesses of crime, including physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, domestic violence, online sexual exploitation, as well as human trafficking. Our advocates are available during standard business hours, but do often flex their schedules to meet the needs of upcoming or emergent investigations or the changing trends with our investigative MDT partners. The highlighted areas of the advocate program include the coordination of the forensic interview, including the scheduling and intake, forensic interview support, follow-up support, and ongoing support. So these pieces are a little bit similar to the other models you've heard about today. Important pieces to note is that our advocates do not provide any ongoing clinical case management, and we do not participate in the recorded forensic interview process. General intake with our investigative MDT during that scheduling and booking phase really allows our advocates to be well informed and prepared to support the child, the youth, and their family and all of their unique needs when they arrive at the center. So advocates will receive a call from police or child protection services, again, our investigative MDT, to schedule and arrange a forensic interview once a disclosure or report has been made to them. Our program supports forensic interviews facilitated jointly between police and child protection, police-only investigations, as well as child protection-only investigations. We ensure to ask if the child and family identify as Indigenous and as well which community they reside, so we can ensure that we're collaborating with all of the culturally based supports, including cultural advisors, knowledge keepers, and elders right from the beginning of our service interaction with a young person. So the forensic interview support is really the first stage that our child and youth advocate support and coordinate a family. The advocates ensure that the space is welcoming, child and youth friendly, it's culturally safe, and it's prepared with any of those special or unique accommodations to best support the child and the youth while they're going through their forensic interview. The advocates will meet and greet the family, providing a tour of the center along with snacks and refreshments. Our office in Simcoe, Muskoka is very much food oriented. There is always food and always snacks for families and our MDT partners. The advocate will also facilitate that introduction phase for the child, the youth to the MDT and go through a bit of the explanation of the next steps, what to expect, and what that forensic interview process will look like for that day. Support for caregivers while the child is in the forensic interview may consist of answering questions, providing that very brief initial system navigation, next steps information, as well as sharing of educational and support resources. When or if a caregiver is being interviewed, advocates will engage in fun activities with the children to not only build rapport with the child, but to ensure that their time before and after a forensic interview is not only trauma informed, but it's as positive of an experience as possible. We, on multiple occasions, have had children leave the center and request to come back the next day to see our advocate, see our facility dog, or just to come back and play. And I think that speaks volumes to the impact of a CYAC model on the investigation process. So, follow-up support for our advocacy program generally begins with a follow-up, often within 72 hours, but similar to C-STAR, that is very much gauged on the needs, the wants, and the direction of the family. During this time, we are there to discuss the family's self-guided next steps, goals, and what they feel their priority needs are. Verbal consent for follow-up calls will include the explanation of our advocate program, next steps towards the child, youth, and family's goals. That includes service referrals, educational materials, needs assessment, or unique cultural supports. Needs assessments at this phase will include a general learning about high priority needs and then setting those next steps plan with the child, the youth, and the family. So our advocates do maintain regular contact with the child and the youth and the family to provide kind of 3 or 4 key areas, mainly being system navigation. As you saw just from that chart at the beginning that Christina showed, this system is not easy to navigate or work through. So that's a really key area of our service support. It also includes referrals to our post-investigative MDT partners, including unique community programming. So this is anything from medical, mental health, victim services, family-focused services, housing, food programs, legal support, as well as animal-based therapeutic programs, LGBTQ2S programming, recreation, as well as grief supports. Our advocates provide ongoing education and information, touching on things like understanding abuse, trauma, emotions, self-care, and then ongoing secondary prevention education. So here is one of our furriest team members. As I've referenced, our region in Simcoe Muskoka is not only geographically diverse, but it's also widespread. So not as large as Sky's model, but just shy of about 9,000 square kilometers. Travel time, access to transportation, and geographical disbursement of our families, as well as our MDTs, were identified barriers to service access. So community partnerships developed across our region to provide us with trauma-informed safe spaces to conduct forensic interviews in various communities, allowing us to meet families where they're at and promote a more seamless service referral for families in their home community. So one of our child and youth advocates is deployed around our region, accompanied by one of our accredited facility dogs. They come along with our portable recording equipment and meet families and MDTs closer to home. So along with our 2 main offices, as you can see here, here is kind of a map view of how we're trying to spread out those locations to best meet our families. So we have our 8 mobile locations across Simcoe Muskoka. In recent years, we've had an increase in investigations that have come through our centers, giving us the opportunity to really reevaluate how we were conducting and delivering our advocate program. So since we've partnered with community partners such as Chigamik Community Health Hub, the Muskoka Parry Sound Sexual Assault Services, which allow us to facilitate a forensic interview closer to home for families. And one of the cuter and furrier aspects to our program are our facility dogs. So this is Beacon and Moose. They provide emotional and relaxation support for the child, the youth, and their family, and create a really general sense of just calm and safety for all of those in the Center for Forensic Interview. That includes our child and youth advocate team and our investigative MDT partners. Uniquely, our child and youth advocates are the certified and trained dog handlers for each of the dogs. So the dogs accompany our advocate team to forensic interviews, community and mobile interviews, follow-up sessions when requested, and at medical examinations when applicable. And the dogs really act as a core tool in our advocates toolkit. One of our other program aspects that functions within our advocate program is our 6-week youth group called Common Ground, funded and supported by the Canadian Women's Foundation and Women and Gender Equality Canada. This is a 6-week youth group for female identifying folks ages 12 to 18 who have witnessed, experienced, or at an increased risk of experiencing gender-based violence to come together in a safe space, learn how to break the cycles of abuse, and really start creating a network of support. Weekly topics are listed here. They are advocate facilitated with a key focus on youth-led discussions. Referrals to the Common Ground program are youth who are receiving ongoing advocate support, as well as community-based referrals. And our program is currently being delivered in person with a virtual attendance option to really start reducing some of the barriers to service access for our young people in our community. The final piece that I will touch on that is really a unique piece of our model is our satellite medical examination room located at our Aurelia location. This is in partnership with the Aurelia Soldiers Memorial Hospital and the Regional Center for Suspected Child Abuse and Neglect. If a child or youth was assaulted outside of 72 hours for evidence collection, they're offered a well child examination. And this exam is conducted by the medical team of nurses and amazing pediatricians, and often occurs offsite at our Aurelia CYAC location. So as you can see, the medical room is warm, it's safe, it's comfortable, and it's often a familiar space for many of the children and youth coming through to be examined in a non-medical setting. It's equipped with all the necessary equipment to conduct a medical examination or a well child examination. And it's a space where families can be supported by a familiar face of a child and youth advocate, as well as a facility dog. So that is what I have here for Simcoe Muskoka. Thank you. I am happy to drop my individual contact info into the chat. Here's our general information. And as others have mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions for myself or any of our program staff here in Simcoe Muskoka. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Sam. All right, so next up, we're going to talk a little bit about some of our challenges and lessons learned as we've been reflecting back on the development and implementation of support services at our centers. So we're hoping this reflection will be useful for existing CYACs who have programs up and running, as well for newer centers who may be considering how they're going to design and implement these support services going forward. So what have we learned? So as we were preparing for this presentation, the four of us, as we were talking with our group, we were reflecting on some lessons and learnings and considerations that we wanted to share. And what I think we quickly realized was that there were some themes specific to our own unique experiences, but there were many that I think we shared and that are probably common across a number of CYACs. And so these are just some of the themes that came up through that discussion, but we're gonna do a little bit of a panel discussion here and hear from each of our panelists about some of their own reflections and learnings from their centers. So Rebecca, let's start with you. I'm going to throw it over to you. What are some lessons learned, challenges, considerations that you would share based on your experience?
Yeah, so I think a lot of them are listed here. Some of the big ones are just learning to work with your MDT. I've been with our CYAC since its inception in 2016. And that was definitely a big learning curve for everybody, for our police and family and children's services who are already doing these investigations together in our community, which was great for them, but then having to work in the advocate and the advocates really having to make a push for that. And that kind of plays into the strong relationship with partners and just needing that consistent coordination across all of our partnering agencies as well as our MDT. We've struggled with staff turnover. We've gone through quite a few advocates, and every time that happens, it's starting fresh again and having to rebuild all those connections. And then funding is a big one we're working on right now. I'm sure a lot of CYACs struggle with this as we get a small pocket of funding from the Department of Justice, and then the rest of our efforts are covered through fundraising. So at this point, I mean, the Child Witness Center is pretty lucky. We have a fantastic development department. When we first opened, they started a capital campaign, and I think it was $2 million they raised right out of the gate, which has sustained us. But now we're at the point we need to access sustainable funding. And through the pandemic, I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this. We're making it a little more challenging as we move forward. So yeah. That's it for me.
All right, Krista, let's go to you. What would you share in terms of what you've learned or some considerations that other centers may want to keep in mind?
Yeah, and I definitely echo what Rebecca said as well, but definitely highlighting that first point that we are still learning. So back in 2012, when we first developed our coordination model, that's what initially worked really well for us, and it allowed us to grow to a certain point. And then we needed to look at our model again and consider different tweaks that we could make to further improve our response and to help us to continue growing. And that's kind of why over this last year we shifted to our new model. So, advice I would offer is just to always be evaluating and looking for ways to continue improving. On that note, kind of moving into that second point, we have developed model evaluation surveys to send to our MDT members to get their feedback on what's working and what's not working. So collecting that feedback, both in developing the model initially and in how it's functioning moving forward, was really important for us for the buy-in of our partners. And strong relationships are key, especially I think in all CYC models, but we find especially for our model without having the benefit of co-location. And having strong relationships with victim service workers are so important. They really help us to bridge the gap between the child and youth files and the Sky referral process. And they catch files that may have fallen through the cracks otherwise and have access to information that ensures that that process is seamless for the child. And then something specific to us because of our geographic spread, we need consistent coordination across all of our communities. So having inconsistencies or vacancies in our coordination positions, which we had experienced previously, was preventing us from growing. And it gave this imbalance or staggered response that was dependent on each community. But having this now consistent coordination model allows for faster growth, faster dissemination of information equally across all of our communities, and it's really just enhanced our response. Um, we also learned that an important role for our SKY coordinators is providing onboarding to new MDT members, but also not just the folks that are directly linked with our MDT, but also all staff within our partner agencies to ensure that whether it's police or child protection, that all members of that agency know about SKY and how to refer. And lastly, one of the things we've learned is to embrace our diversity, whether that's from our local community or for our region. We do have a unique region, and I think many folks potentially listening to this are maybe thinking the same about their region. And so, in order to provide a service that's collaborative and non-traumatizing, but still works for our area, we needed to really embrace our uniqueness and be creative at finding solutions and ways to implement the best practices, such as for what we're talking about today, this advocate role, and then do so in a way that really meets the needs of children and youth in our region.
That's great. Okay. And Sam, how about you? What would you share?
Yeah, I think hearing from Rebecca and Krista first, we too can echo a lot of that. And for time's sake, I'm not going to repeat, and we agree. The biggest piece that I wanted to speak to first for us here in Simcoe Muskoka is listening to your MDT and the importance of strong, engaged relationships with those partners. For us, that's both our investigative MDT as well as our post-investigation or our referral MDT partners. Working with 6 completely separate police services that compile 17 plus detachments, that's a lot of individual teams, people, and programs to not only create relationships with, create buy-in, and then keep those relationships ongoing. In high trauma fields like child protection, policing, victim advocacy, child and youth advocacy centers, there's high burnout. We're seeing the staff turnover, and that's happening amongst all of our partners as well. So we are definitely struggling with the building of relationships, but then also the maintenance of that. You get a really great connection, a team really well connected, and then there's turnover. And so it's that taking a couple steps back and starting that process again. The awareness and the buy-in of MDT with our various communities around our region has been a learning curve. What that looked like when we opened our doors in 2014 compared to what that looks like now post-COVID in 2022, it definitely speaks to the need to agree, Krista, consistently evaluate, assess how your programs are running, be creative. What was happening 5 years ago may not necessarily be the right fit for what's happening now with your MDT partners, happening now with the children and youth and their needs in the community. It may not be meeting the trends of crime that's occurring in your region as well. So I think really recognizing and being able to be innovative and creative, sometimes steering away from those really boxed in understanding of this model. For us individually, our facility dog program has been a constant learning curve for us and how that works and how that is implemented into our ongoing care and service provision with children, youth, and families. Two of these pieces that connect for us are the staff turnover and the turnover in general in the field of work that we do, as well as our facility dog program, because uniquely our child and youth advocates are the trained dog handlers. When we have a turnover in our program, it creates holes and gaps in multiple areas of the program, and not just maybe that system navigation piece or the forensic interview support side of our advocate program. It's a little bit more widespread. And again, if I can speak advice, is be creative and be innovative. A lot of where we start when we're opening advocacy centers and we're learning the understanding of the model is sometimes built and grown out of a United States model or understanding, and then trying to make that fit for us here in Canada or here in rural communities. And rather than trying to make something else fit for you, just make it fit for you right from the beginning. Don't try to shift and change your programming to fit a model. Make the model fit the needs of the children and youth that you're supporting and the multidisciplinary teams in your region. Thanks.
That's great. And for us from C-STAR, I feel like all of the points that I thought were good points I was going to make have been made already. So I think that's a testament to just how common a lot of these experiences and considerations are. I think I will echo the need for just maintaining those strong relationships and communication with partners, particularly when we know that turnover is just a constant reality. It's not often enough to just inform your partners about what you're doing and have kind of a good system going in terms of referring to your advocate program or to being aware of your CYAC, and then just letting that slide, because over time that level of awareness and just that level of practice will inevitably shift and change and degrade over time. So it really is, it's not a reflection, I think, on the quality of the services or the quality of the CYAC, that there is a need to continually get in front of partners, provide communication, have check-ins, ensure you're putting effort into building and maintaining those relationships, because it's certainly not just a one-time thing. It really needs to be an ongoing effort, particularly I think for those of us that don't operate in a co-located model. So we're not always front and center in front of, we're not always kind of in person and front and center when partners are working with these cases and referring for supportive services. And so I think that's really important to be able to demonstrate the value of your program and the value of your advocate services, and to be able to do that consistently. I think I'll echo, as well as others have said, just the importance of being open to change and adapting and taking what you expect the model will look like at the beginning and being willing to look at what actually does work in your region and what doesn't, and being willing to adapt and shift. I think there's value in having, maintaining that structure, that initial structure that you build the role on. And I think that's one of the reasons that these guidelines can be so helpful, is that they do provide an overall structure of what this role can and should look like. But then within that, it gives you room to adapt, because of course you don't want to implement a role that's just continually going to be growing and changing and is never the same. You need kind of a consistent structure that you're building that from, but within that structure, there's always room to innovate and adapt and make things better. I think our workshops are one of the examples of that they did not originally, they originally were not part of the vision for our support services, but quickly have become a really valuable part of the services that we deliver. And I think when COVID hit and we quickly transitioned to a virtual model, that was one of the pieces that I think has been a really valuable innovation for us, that we transitioned those workshops over to a virtual model. And that has actually been working very well and has helped with uptake and accessibility of those. And so none of that we could have predicted 4 or 5 years ago. But I think just kind of a willingness to adapt and roll with the changes and sort of make the best of opportunities is always important. All right, we're going to end it there. Just a couple additional resources that I wanted to mention for anyone looking for further reading on this. A couple we've come across that I would say are high quality resources. There is the Field Guide to Family Advocacy that I had mentioned earlier in the presentation. This was developed by the Children's Advocacy Centers of Mississippi and West Virginia Child Advocacy Network. It also comes with a companion supervisor manual. And so together, this is a nice sort of practical package in looking at how to develop and implement the advocate role, particularly for newer advocates or newer centers. There's also the Advocates Guide, working with parents of children who have been sexually assaulted, from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. And this, again, is a great guide, lots of practical information and valuable for advocates who are thinking about how and when they'll engage with families and what that support can look like. So I will try to pop the links to these in the chat. They are available online. So would recommend checking those out for anyone looking for further information. And with that, we are going to open it up for questions. Now, I think, Antigua, you're going to keep an eye on the questions for us here. Is that right?
Absolutely. So first of all, I'd like to thank our presenters today for their time and very informative session. We have a few questions. The first one is an open question. Is attending forensic interviews outside the CYAC common? How often would you say this happens at your centers?
So I can speak to this one. I actually saw it pop up while I was presenting. So for us, pre-pandemic, it was pretty common for us to attend interviews outside of our brick and mortar, even though we're co-located. We do operate over 3 communities as well as a rural area. So quite often, if police and family and children's services are having difficulties having the family come to our center, which is in Kitchener, the advocates will travel to other centers. Now, we are only allowed to operate out of and provide support to families out of police detachments or family and children's service offices. So in Waterloo region, our police have 3 separate detachments, as well as we might travel to some of our OPP detachments. And then family and children's services have 2 offices that we can travel to. And now that the pandemic's kind of slowing, we're starting to see that our advocates are being asked to travel a little bit more than they were during the pandemic.
Yeah, I can just add to that a little. I can't say that I can give you a statistic for how frequently that occurs, but it happens on a case-by-case basis. You know, even though we operate in 6 communities across our region, we are so rural, our area is so large that still requires some families to travel, 1.5 or 2 hours to the nearest child-friendly interview room. So we do also have mobile equipment, and our team can be dispatched to conduct interviews wherever it best meets the needs for the child and their family. So, over the last couple of years, we've conducted interviews in the homes of children, youth, or their families, in schools, in counselors' offices, wherever, we can get a good quality interview, and also where the child or youth is going to feel comfortable. And so that mobile equipment really allows us to do that. And so although we do have these child-friendly interview rooms, we really do try and be flexible to the needs of the children and youth that we serve.
I too can speak a little bit to that. I don't think for us here in Simcoe Muskoka, investigations taking place outside of an advocacy center in the sense that an advocate is attending to a police station or attending to a child protection office is quite common. Those further reaching multidisciplinary teams that we may not have super strong ongoing relationships with, that's kind of the unknown that I don't think we can quantify or that I can really speak to. But I can say for us, our mobile recording equipment and really launching our community and mobile approach and setting up those spaces around Simcoe and Muskoka has made such an impact for families, where previously families would be, needing to travel upwards of 2.5, 3 hours sometimes to one of our physical locations in Aurelia and Barrie. And so I think not only are we able to have better reach to our multidisciplinary teams and our families, but it's reducing the barriers to service access. And then I would kind of continue with that and say, even beyond the forensic interview, it's allowing us contact and service support for families who are more dispersed out of our general, more urban communities. And so that point of contact being made at the forensic interview then has a domino effect on the access for their ongoing service and support as well, beyond the forensic interview.
And for us, I think we've seen similar factors. It tends to fluctuate over time. And of course, COVID kind of changed our dynamics quite a bit. But I would say probably about 30 to 35% of overall cases, eligible cases in our region, likely don't come to our CYAC kind of in a typical year. And that we know there's always going to be realities where there's an urgent issue where the child needs to be interviewed at school, or it's otherwise just not appropriate to transport the child to a CYAC. So we know there are always going to be those types of cases. And as well, travel time and distance play into those decisions as well. So we know there's always going to be a portion where it's just not the right fit for a particular case.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Sky and C-Star. With 2 advocates, how many families does each advocate have on their caseload? As well, with each family being different and needing different supports, what is the common time frame for each supportive meeting?
So for us, I think our answer, it really depends. I don't know that I can give kind of a solid number. I would say caseload, typically our advocates may be carrying 12, 15 or so, kind of at a high point. One thing I didn't mention is that our advocate support, and especially our follow-up support, is voluntary for families. So the majority of families visiting C-Star will have advocate support during their visit, but it's very much voluntary if the family is interested in having that ongoing follow-up support. And so we do see some attrition there. Not all families are interested in having that support to begin with. And then of those who are, some will have varying needs. So some will have a few contacts and then drop off the case list, and that's fine. And others will stay for that ongoing length of time. And so all of that factors into how much of a caseload any one advocate is carrying at any one time. Really depends. In terms of context, typically our advocates are in contact with the family. We'll do a follow-up maybe next day or so within 72 hours, and then checking in maybe every other week, monthly. And the frequency of the contact will tend to fluctuate as well. So it's typically most intense kind of immediately after the visit for the forensic interview. Typically more contacts more frequently at that point, and then they tend to dwindle off. And then we often see kind of spikes in the level of contact around important points in time. So maybe if there is a family court matter going through, issues of custody and access, sometimes those will see a spike in contact with their advocates again. And then when the case is preparing to go to court, we'll see more intensive contact with our advocates around those points in time.
Yeah, Christina said it perfectly. I don't think I have anything to add in terms of, what that follow-up support looks like for families. Definitely just echoing, it's definitely more frequently in the beginning and then kind of tends to taper. And we also notice those spikes around important events. In terms of our caseload for our coordinators, that's where we might look a little bit different. So our coordinators don't hold a caseload in that they're not providing necessarily that ongoing support to families post-interview unless one of our communities is experiencing a victim service vacancy, in which case our coordinators can fill that role where there is that gap. Um, and so this is our first year operating with our new model with the 2 coordinators. And so historically we had anywhere between 6 and 7 coordinators across our region. And so each of them had about on average 10 files in their caseload. And so this is going to look a little bit heavier for each coordinator as we get this model up and running, but less intense support for the family in our model. So we'll see how that goes. And maybe in a year, I'll have an opportunity to give a follow-up and let everyone know how that's working for us and what adjustments we've made over the year.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Samantha. Curious about the services for the 19 to 24-year-olds and how including some older youth in your model has worked in your community.
Yeah. When we first opened in 2014 and the first initial years of service, we provided generic child and youth support and programming up to and including age 18. We had multiple large-scale human trafficking investigations that had taken place throughout Simcoe County and Muskoka, where a bulk of those survivors and victims crossed over that 18 range and they sat in that young adult range. So initially that change in service provision and policy was created because of that. It looks similar to a crossover between direct youth support or child support and caregiver support. Really, the biggest difference is that we're communicating with a wider variety of service providers. So we're not just providing referral supports and partnerships, service access to 18 and under, but ensuring that our post-investigative referral partners that we're capturing those areas in the system as well. Let's say we have a 23 or 24-year-old youth who comes through the center. They may come through as a victim, but also be a mom and a caregiver. And so that type of service may look different as well. It may be parenting strategies, as Christina mentioned, and those general grounding and coping skills, just really ensuring that they're getting connected to the services that they need. I would say more and more we're seeing the up to and including age 24 in a bulk of the youth services, at least in our community, that there is supports and programs that bridge that gap between 18 and 24 to support that older youth population, if that answers your question.
I hope so. And again, for you, Samantha, there's another one here. How do you provide ongoing education to your families, provide handouts or online references?
Yes. Yes and yes. So we are right off the bat, we are equipping families with as many tangible takeaway resources as possible. We have a wonderful partnership and memorandum of understanding with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. They're based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, and they have just a plethora of education resources for caregivers, for parents going through this process. Everything from understanding the grooming process, what is child sexual abuse and how does it occur, how to safeguard my child after an experience of assault has occurred, a variety of different sectors. So we support them right off the bat if that's something that they're looking for, and we have them take those away sometimes right during that initial forensic interview. It may be unique to the family. We may have a caregiver saying like, look, we're having, I'd really like some some grounding techniques for me as a caregiver or for my youth who seems to be having increased anxiety since this has occurred. And so setting them up with some of those more unique, more directed, individualized education or informative resources. Because we are seeing this be an increased need, we're also seeing longer referral times between leaving our forensic interview and getting connected to ongoing, I should say ongoing and long-term supports. There's often lots of brief supports that still have long wait periods. So we are in the midst of developing and launching what we're calling a bridge support program through our child and youth advocates, which again is not duplicating what our partners are doing, but more so bridging that time gap for high needs families to provide some of those education, psychoeducational pieces between the time that the forensic interview takes place and the time that an ongoing secured or long-term referral partner can be placed.
Great, thank you. This next question is for anyone. What would you say are some of the reasons for the higher turnover with advocates in their role? Would you say it is related directly to work or more of an infrastructure issue at the centers?
I can speak for us as somebody who was in the advocate role and then moved into the supervisor role. One of the driving forces for me wanting to leave that role, and I know for some of our other advocates who've moved on over the years, it's been our schedule. So working shift work, working until 8 o'clock at night, starting later in the day. It's not for everybody, especially people with young children at home. And that's typically one of the big reasons for turnover in our area.
Go ahead, Krista, you beat me
Okay.
to it.
Yeah, so we're new. We haven't experienced the advocate turnover yet, but something that we experienced very heavily that was even more so during the pandemic was the turnover in our victim service roles. And because we had that victim service partnership with our coordination role, that's something that hit us really hard. And I think it's really quite a variety of factors. I also started working with survivors of trauma in victim services. And so, I can speak to my experience. I think the role itself is very challenging in and of itself in providing support and hearing the stories firsthand, as well as there's, at least in my experience, there was a lack of support. I couldn't access clinical supervision. And so it was very challenging for me to be able to, process all those things that you're experiencing. And then also, it was the barriers and the challenges of working with other agencies when you're supporting an individual. And, this was before our CYC was really functioning, but also I supported victims of all ages. And it was really challenging to try and navigate and provide that advocacy support for that person in the presence of so many barriers and challenges. And it just seemed like we would take one step forward and 2 steps back. And so really for me in that role, that's what really got me involved in helping to develop this CYC response in our region, is finding a way to have those agencies all work together so that we wouldn't be working in our silos and that we would be supporting each other. And I can honestly say, having a shift to working in that way, I was feeling in my victim service role like I wasn't sure how long I could continue in that role. And in my current role, I definitely don't feel that way. I feel like working more collaboratively together has been more supportive, and results in folks that can stick around a little bit longer doing what is still a very difficult work. That was my experience.
Thank you, Krista. Samantha, we've got 1 minute. I'm just mindful of the time. So I'd like to thank everyone again for the presentation. I have included the PowerPoint with in the chat box again for those of you who did not have access to it. Our presenters have generously included their contact information. I know there were some questions we did not get to. They have accepted anybody contacted them for any of the questions that were not answered. I hope you all enjoyed the presentation, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you so much to our co-presenters today. I hope that was helpful and informative, and wish you all the best. Have a great day.